now present For the Record.
Just ahead, the 50th anniversary of sweeping federal legislation that transformed our waterways. Plus, sitting down with Republican governor candidate Tim Michels.
Every agency in state government is going to get a very thorough review.
And a string of school swatting calls across Wisconsin are not isolated to our state.
I think there's some reason to believe that they're connected.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Naomi Coles. This week marks the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act nationwide, a landmark piece of federal legislation that transformed how Americans' waterways are regulated. The Wisconsin DNR's Adrian Stocks, Director of Water Quality, talked to me about how it transformed Wisconsin. It's been 50 years since the Clean Water Act passed nationwide. What kind of impact has that had on Wisconsin's waters?
It's been very significant, Naomi. As you know, Tuesday marked the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. It was passed in 1972 unanimously by both houses of Congress to address what public had realized was an untenable situation for our nation's waters. Before that, there was open industrial dumping within all of the waters across the United States. Many areas were devoid of life. The Clean Water Act really set up a structure for states to implement a program that required treatment of wastewater discharges in order to ensure that the state's waters and the national waters were fishable and swimmable.
What was the state of Wisconsin's waters, and perhaps particularly Madison's waters, before that?
Yeah, and across the state, really, there were these same issues where there was open sort of discharging of relatively untreated wastewater that could have serious impacts on both the ability to recreate in those waters and on the aquatic life that lived in those waters. So many times areas that were downstream of industries such as paper and pulp mills or downstream of large municipal treatment plants would have serious water quality issues where fish weren't able to be consumed if they were living at all, where it really wasn't safe to recreate. The Clean Water Act really set up that requirement that all the dischargers would be required to meet limits and do adequate treatment before discharging based on limitations to meet water quality criteria. Those criteria are designed really to support uses of the waters, particularly recreation, fish and aquatic life, and human health.
A lot of those rivers, I imagine, feed Madison's lakes, right? So, you know, here in Madison, we have 5 lakes. What would have been kind of the state of those lakes? How does the Clean Water Act impact them?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it is. You really have to think about everything that is discharged does travel downstream eventually. So it's really important what's happening upstream of those waters and what happens directly into the lakes themselves. So as we see the Clean Water Act expand to start addressing things such as stormwater pollution as well as CAFOs, all those contribute to a structure that helps reduce the amount of pollution that's entering the waters. Now, I'd have to say the work is not completely done. There is certainly areas that the Clean Water Act does not cover, and it's very specific to a point source discharge of a pollutant into a water of the state. Now, that means that some places are not considered a point source. Those are not regulated necessarily by the Clean Water Act. So I think, Naomi, those are the challenges that we continue to face, is how do we address those areas of pollution sources that aren't covered under the Clean Water Act. And I think there's strategies the department is utilizing and other agencies to address some of those.
Could you give me some examples of what you mean when you say point source?
Sure. So a point source is really, if you think of an end of pipe, a pipe that's coming either from an industry or potentially from a publicly owned treatment works, like a wastewater treatment plant. But the Clean Water Act also includes point sources such as MS4s, which are the curb and gutter, the streets that you see that is impervious pavement in a municipality.
Like the one behind us?
Yeah, and this one is likely, this is exactly that. That's a stormwater discharge pipe. So those are also regulated under the Clean Water Act, as well as our concentrated animal feeding operations, as you know, as CAFOs. But that is really about the extent of what we know as point sources.
There's a case pending before the U.S. Supreme Court right now that could potentially cut back some of the areas that the Clean Water Act controls. Talk me through some of those issues and potentially how it might impact regulation in Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's a challenging question, I think, Naomi. The WOTUS question, which is the waters of the United States and how that is defined, has gone back and forth in the courts for many years. There have been a number of legal opinions on this, and it is back in the courts again. I think Wisconsin was fortunate in the way that when we designed the WPDS program, which is the permitting program delegated to us from the EPA, that comes as a result of the Clean Water Act, we defined the waters of Wisconsin as part of that within statute. So we're waiting to see how that decision may impact the regulatory authorities for the agency, but at this point in time, we have to wait to see what comes out from that case.
Absolutely. Anything I've missed that you'd like to add?
The agency has been really proud of the progress that we've made. I think particularly we've sort of shown ourselves to be leaders in environmental protection, and particularly in the Clean Water Act in several areas, both from numeric nutrient limits, such as our phosphorus criteria that we've had. That has had a really significant impact on reducing harmful algal blooms across the state, which can really impact recreational experience and can be a real cause for health concerns. In addition to that, just this past year we had promulgated standards for PFAS chemicals, which was also another big step forward, ensuring that we can protect the public health of Wisconsin.
Thanks so much for taking the time, Adrian. And after the break, our political reporter with a one-on-one with Republican candidate for governor Tim Michels.